So if you missed it, we actually got our first Diablo 4 developer interview with Raxx. There's going to be 2 more. There's going to be with Rob and another creator whose name I cannot quite remember. I believe they're a Korean creator. I'm very sorry. But the video that I want to make here is twofold. One, for the people who didn't see the interview or who just wanted TLDR, I went and made a complete breakdown of every question that got asked, every topic. And what I did was I highlighted what I think are the key takeaways or things that were insights that weren't necessarily related to the questions themselves, but just great insights into how Diablo 4 is currently being developed. And the other reason why I want to make this video is because not enough people are putting respect on Raxx's name here. Not enough people are putting respect on this interview. And for some reason, even when the developers are being this human, this open, this transparent, and giving such great information, people are still finding reasons to just crap on it. And I gotta be honest, I don't think that the people currently screaming about this interview, whether or not Raxx did a good job, whether or not the developers were forward enough or transparent enough, at this point, I don't think that those people actually want this game to be a good game or actually care about it. I think they just like hating. So let's go ahead and break down the interview, talk about the topics, give you the quick rundown for the people who do want to learn about it, and then share my opinion on the things that were talked about here. Because even though a lot of it is really great insight, I don't think that all of it is speaking to the pain points that I myself have experienced and people in my community have experienced. And I think that by reviewing the interview, we can gain some better insights, or at least we can get a more complete picture of what's currently happening in the game and what a lot of people would like to see happen in the game. I'll go ahead and include a link to this just in case you want to be able to read it yourself. What I'm not going to do is just quote my document because it's included down below. What I am going to do is I'm going to read the question itself, talk about the highlighted things from each person that I think are important, and then share a very quick insight as to how I feel about that thing. I don't want to waste too much of your time, right? I want this to be faster than just watching the base video itself. So the first question starts off with the idea that there are more changes coming in this season to integral portions of the game, as in toughness and item working and crafting, etc. What prompted the team to change up defenses and difficulty, and are we trying to make the game more difficult? Zhaven starts off by sharing some great insight to the fact that there was a question in the game is what do players do about monsters? And they've continuously iterated on what players can do, but hadn't iterated on monsters. And they wanted to pair a massive overhaul to monsters, their difficulty, whether or not elites or champions are there, all of that with a new content type being the tower. Colin then jumps in with the fact that for the game to be interesting and meaningful, the challenges have to be interesting and meaningful as well. That seems like an obvious statement, but this kind of combats the idea that the game should seek to cater to the idea of just brainless stomping of monsters. That can be in the game, but for it to be truly meaningful, there has to be more than that. They really like the fact that you can graduate out of the game being difficult or challenging, meaning that if you grind enough or if you play in a certain way, you can get to the point where you are super tanky, you don't have to worry about damage, or you do so much damage that you don't have to worry about positioning as much. But what they don't like is that there aren't meaningful distinctions between making decisions between these things. To that point, the major change of defenses over to toughness is first and foremost to widen the development space that's available for them, the levers that they can pull on. Because they didn't like the fact that defenses were super flat and shallow, and that basically you just hit a number and that was it. It didn't allow you to express power in ways that aren't just directed towards damage numbers. You couldn't really become tankier in a system with caps. I tend to agree with their approach. I think that Diablo 4 is best when it serves the majority of the player base, and I think that's best when content types can be different and can allow you to differently express what your character looks like. So yes, it's awesome that Helltides, even in Torment 4, eventually become super trivial, and you could just kind of get into that flow zen state and just smash through it. I completely agree with that. Similarly, if you're just doing massive grind sessions, T4 Belial doesn't have to continue to prove to be difficult, right? There is a point where it is difficult, and that is felt very much through, progressing through Torment. And then later on, it can just be brain off, smash and get your loot. But the other side of that is that things that are meaningful have to be meaningfully challenging. So we have had the pit thus far, and we're now going to have the tower with a leaderboard. That is where people like me can go to express and enjoy the fantasy of being challenged and overcoming it. And if you don't worry about that, you do not have to. And I like that differentiation, that bifurcation. In the current system, doesn't really allow for that. So anything that moves us towards a place that does, I think is better. Raxx goes on to ask whether or not they really change the behavior of monsters, something that was very difficult for me to experience. in playing in the PTR, and actually Colin speaks on why that is the case. The long and short about what was changed with monsters, not only the addition of champion packs and not only the addition of more affixes, was that monsters originally had cooldowns for each ability or effect that they could do. They had an AI determination of what they would do based on what was happening. Now, instead, it's going to be a random application from the list of things that they can do, and it's based on how quickly they are attacking and attack speed as opposed to cooldown. What this also means is that by speeding up the monsters, by scaling their attack speed in higher difficulty, monsters become smarter and react faster. And not only that, are going to cycle through the things that they do more often. Zhaven goes on to explain that monster packs were coded to always have a specific composition. And instead now when you hit a pack from a monster family, it could be oops all ranged units or oops all brutes. This is meant to give differentiation combat scenario to combat scenario, as opposed to always walking up and knowing that you're going to be fighting XYZ monsters. They also made it so that more monster types that are currently in the game can be elevated to elite and champion. So the example here was that the mini spiders in packs with arachnids never could, but now they can. The cool thing here is that they are very fast and they attack very fast, but because they're just trash mobs, you never really noticed this before. But once it's an elite with 4 affixes, who knows whether or not these little spiderlings are like the big challenge. Colin also calls out the point that blasters wouldn't really feel this in the moment-to-moment of trivialized content. But when the gameplay slows down in places like the pit and the tower and at higher torment, you should be able to notice these differences. I'll be honest with you all though, I really didn't. So it might be that this is being further iterated on. This might be that this is something that post-PTR is the vision that they have for it. But at least in the PTR, I didn't see this. I do think it's good that monster packs are more deadly, more interesting, more varied, and that we're going to see different types of monsters in different places of threat. My major issue is that with the number of affixes that were added, pit gameplay and thus tower gameplay just became like disgustingly bad. The amount of like different spinning Tron discs and scimitars flying through the air and explosions on the ground and cold effects going through didn't really feel like I was engaging with a lot of different deadly effects. It was just so much happening all of the time that there was nothing to react to. I was either unkillable or I got one shot, and I didn't feel like there was a way for me to meaningfully engage with that. So I'm hoping that they also walked out of the PTR understanding that. I know that I myself, along with the majority of other people that I know, had communicated this, so I'm really hoping to see a lot of change there. Raxx was a little bit confused with whether or not the changes to skill points and Paragon points, for that matter, were going to make it into Season 11, meaning that we are meant to start off with 1 skill point at level 1, and the answer is yes. Basically, they felt like the addition of all the skill points and the stat points and the Paragon points that we had gone from doing Renown and the Altars of Lilith were making this huge discrepancy between not only new players and returning players, but also, delegitimizing the season reset, the entire point of seasons, and furthermore, really changing the dynamic of the early levels to make them completely unimportant. And not only that, but not felt at all. Basically shortcutting progression, but not in a way that made the game feel better. I do agree with that. My big thing was that I'd rather see the points front loaded a bit, so that by level 20, I had a fully engaged build and I was just empowering it after that, as opposed to waiting all the way to level 30 before I realistically even had a keystone passive or my ultimate skill. There was just a little bit too much of a difference. I didn't really feel slowed down at all. So I don't know if it's necessarily succeeding at the thing that Colin was referencing, where it's like, oh, Magic Gear will matter more because you're spending more time in those levels. I didn't feel that at all. Quite frankly, I just didn't. I don't know what they can do about that. But that being said, my experience is obviously very different because I'm always playing a meta and well-performing build through the leveling portion because I've been able to theory craft that thing. So maybe somebody having a different experience where there's kind of just winging it, they feel this progression more. Maybe it's just a difference of experience at that point. I'm going to put a little bit more time on this question because I think that this shared some of the best insight into how the game was developed and where it is now and how the developers see the game. So the question is basically, why are Capstones back? This got into the idea of points of friction. When developers are talking about points of friction, they're talking about things that the player must overcome to be able to accomplish a thing. So friction would slow you down. And there is good friction and bad friction. And it turns out people really liked capstones. So Zhaven shares that capstones were actually added to the base game super late into the development of the game. So they were underbaked. And they weren't really built in a way that could be expanded on. And when they were moving into Vessel of Hatred, they realized that Capstones locking difficulties wasn't going to work with the introduction of torment levels. So they instead thought, hey, let's just remove this. Players will also be happy that we're removing this point of friction. But it turns out that players didn't like that. Why? It was nice to be able to have mastery over the capstone. It was really cool to be able to show like, hey, I got into there super early and I managed to do it. Like, oh, this build can blow through the capstone super early. It really just offered places for like player expectation to be exceeded and player agency to be expanded on. And they realized that like, hey, we actually probably never should have removed these. We just need to find a way to make them better. They're hoping, and this is not for season 11, but they're hoping to be able to add even more capstones and actually have them rotate. So season to season, we're not just doing the exact same capstones every time, just in case it turns out not everybody really likes particular ones. Being able to mix it up is definitely a really good change here. Hopefully they can expedite that. Colin did talk about something that I felt very real and honest, and it's something that, you know, from my perspective, I see happen a lot. And it's interesting how this keeps, perpetuating in the community itself. But Colin points out that it's interesting that how at times when they try to add challenge, they get rapped on the knuckles or clapped back at. And sometimes it's actually good to have a thing to work for and a reward for doing it. And so often people in the community will ask them to continue to sand away edges, continue to remove friction, and to streamline things. And I think in certain places, this makes sense. But there's something that I see a lot in the community is when it's this phenomenon, and it applies to everything. Two people both say, I have a problem, but they don't talk about it in an explicit or specific enough format. So one dude goes, I hate how they keep slowing us down and they keep trying to pad hours. And somebody else hears that and goes, oh, I imagine they're talking about crafting. And I agree, it feels like they're padding the hours, like Masterworking was padding the hours. And they go, yeah, man, they need to understand that we don't want to just waste our time. We want to be rewarded for overcoming challenges and doing stuff. This person is thinking about capstone, and they're negatively attributing things to the idea of challenge here. This person believes that in the way that crafting is set up, challenge is being removed, and it's just about time. These two people, wanting to be part of something bigger, both agreed that they're talking about the same thing. And because of this, these ideas bubble up and get parroted and don't really speak to like the core issue or even the explicit issue of either one person. Obviously, that example is a bit extreme, but it happens in a lot of different places where I think people don't necessarily understand that. And I really, really hope that the developers are never afraid to add meaningful challenge and meaningful reward to it, because there are people who go, if it's in the game, I deserve to be able to do it, which is just a very weird entitlement to me. And I think this is probably where I'm going to start getting flamed. There's a weird entitlement that diminishes the value of challenge for the people who would enjoy that thing. And if you wouldn't enjoy that thing, it's okay that you wouldn't get the prize at the end of it. And I don't really know how they can solve this issue. I just hope that they're not afraid to add challenge where the reward for doing that challenge is something greater than the reward for not having done that challenge. You got into the topic of tempering and masterworking. Basically, how'd you land on a new system? And you're worried that it's too deterministic. Colin points out the fact that basically tempering and masterworking, we're approaching determinism, which is like both true and not true, right? We're asking for less frustrating RNG as opposed to pure determinism. But I understand how effectively the thing that they were hearing and being communicated was make it deterministic. Give me infinite resets on tempering means let me eventually get the outcome that I want. I think that it is okay to want to invest time to get to the outcome that you want without the potential of bricking from tempering, because they had this idea that tempering was an early portion of like your item's journey. So bricking it early would be fine. Bricking it later would be significantly worse. It turns out that just bricking gear in general was a major issue because so many builds required specific tempers as opposed to being okay with multiple temper outcomes. So it just turned out that like the original implementation and what people are asking for and what the devs heard and what the devs thought just weren't running in parallel. They did not mesh up. But because of this idea of people effectively asking for determinism, they made these systems significantly more deterministic, and that has shaved off too much of the fun and the enjoyment and the excitement. So what they would like to do is in Masterworking, find a way to re-impregnate it with some of this excitement to make it so that it's not just you get the GA that you want, but instead what you're getting out of it is more enjoyable than just getting the GA that you want. They didn't explain a specific here, but I do think it's really interesting to see what people were asking for, how the developers interpreted that, how it is logical to understand like the terminus that they got to, but how I still don't think that it really was what we were asking for ultimately. And this correction in what looks like an overcorrection is instead trying to deliver the thing that they thought that we were asking for. It's cool to see that line of logic and how we got there. I still don't think that it's accurate, but it helps to grant context to the why, right? We didn't have the why and now we do, so that can help us to inform how we create critique later on. Like when I'm saying masterwork reset down to 1, I'm not saying I just want to get the outcome that I want. I don't want to walk away with an item that is worse because I tried to get to the outcome that I want. These are two very different things. And if all they're hearing is this part of it, they're ignoring this part of it. So I know that when I'm communicating my feedback, to make sure that I'm speaking to as explicit of a desire as possible, as opposed to, again, assuming that things are granted or given. Basically, Raxx asked, where are dopamine hits supposed to come from if they're not coming from super rare items? Colin shared some insight here where it's that basically excitement only tends to come from extremes with really high highs and really low lows. And what they've learned is that as long as their median outcome is closer to the high end than the low end, people tend to be happy. This is why tempering had issues, but also why sanctifying is kind of in the place that it is. And they talked about sanctifying a lot, actually, and it's really evident from how they were talking about it that sanctifying is not meant to just be a seasonal thing. It is being built with being eternal in mind. They kept referring to it as eternal. They've called this evergreen before, but basically being a core system. And it's actually causing issues with like it being part of a season because of like what seasons need to be able to offer. But basically right now, because they're developing sanctifying as a potential eternally available system, it needs to be a lot more tame because it can't just be this wild power spike. But because of that, it's not being able to deliver on what a seasonal power is meant to do, which is like a drastic build altering, difference here. Raxx said that the tower doesn't feel distinctly different from the pit, and Zhaven agreed. The tower is the pit right now, but with a few extra bells and whistles. But they shared really good insight here that's the thing that I really want to hammer on. It is that the pit has been stuck where the pit is for so long because it was the only competitive content that we had in the game, the only way of like measuring the success of builds and the expertise of players. And because of that, the pit has been very uninteresting and very boring. The tower is clearly meant to be a greater rift, but not in the just taking greater rifts from Diablo 3 way, but in what greater rifts offered to the game. And this is very much in a beta. But the great thing that Zhaven shared here was the fact that with the tower now being in the game and being a very consistent lower RNG player skill expression in leaderboard tied activity, other things can now go serve other purposes. The pit can be wild and wacky and waving inflatable arm. There can be a goblin pit. There can be a oops all bosses pit. There can be a seasonal content is impacting the pit with this Belial change where Belial's in the pit and doing stuff. This drastically changes like what the pit offers. And if you only care about the pit as a leaderboard adjacent activity, it pisses you off. Like the Belial in the pit sucks. Like he's a terrible boss. The Belial eyes, while increasing progression, are like very clunky to deal with. But that's just it. If the pit is meant to be a super grindy content where you level up your glyphs and you get Paragon from it, it has to offer variety and variability so that you don't hate just doing it all the time. And I super agree with that. And it never really hit me, the fact that the pit had to be what the pit was because there wasn't something like the tower. And that's why we didn't get leaderboards for the pit, because the pit wasn't meant to serve this purpose. It's meant to be a thing that you grind for like super end game power in the form of glyphs, in the form of Paragon levels. And it couldn't be interesting because then we wouldn't have anything to be competitive in. And that was just like great insight. They also understand the fact that even though they do not want the tower to just be greater rifts. They are clearly lifting it from Diablo 3, which he was, what I really like too is that later on he talks about the fact that like he doesn't care where the inspiration for great content comes from as long as it's great and inside of the context of Diablo 4. So they want the tower to be in the context of Diablo 4. They want it to be distinctly Diablo 4. They want it to be what Diablo 4 is looking to offer to players, and they know it's not there right now. Really the message that it's in beta and that's meant to be very transparent and back and forth with the community about how it gets developed and how we want it to look like. That's significantly like more intensive and more interactive than other things have been. And he was really hammering on that. But they know it's not there yet, and they intend for it to get there. And they intend for us to be there with them hand in hand along the way to get it to be there. So it isn't just greater rifts. Colin also shared the fact that they recognize that group play mechanics and interactions have been missing from the game. And it's because when the game first came out, they were very gun shy because they don't want Diablo 4 to feel like a mandatory multiplayer game. They're no longer willing to be gun shy about that, and they instead want to find ways to be able to better nourish gameplay that revolves around your group all doing something and that mattering. This calls back to things like ZDPS Barb in Diablo 3, and that it was very cool that there were support builds. And I agree with that. I come from playing Diablo 2 at a competitive level. And I come from doing, ladder season starts, getting world first Bale kill every single ladder season that we participated, getting world first 99. And that only exists because of group play, and group play inherently helps to incubate and to grow community. And this has been like decidedly missing in Diablo 4. And I'm glad to see that they're not afraid of that anymore. I get that there are people who, don't want to see anybody else in the game, and they don't want to feel like they're being punished for playing single player, which is just like, I get, but it's such a wildly selfish line of thought that this multiplayer game with an open world shouldn't seek to empower group play and for that to be meaningfully different. Yeah, I don't know. I feel a little like gloves off right here in this video, just because there's been like a lot of like really, really regressive thoughts out there about like what the game should try to offer. And I think it's just like okay to try to champion things that make other online games very successful, even other Blizzard games very successful, and community and grouping and working together to accomplish a thing, I think have always led to the greatest successes. Even in Diablo 2, while people like to idealize this concept of like single player, sorry, my eyes are so dry, our house is wicked dry. But people like to romanticize this idea of like single player, and that's perfectly fine. You get to do that, right? You get to choose to play alone. But when I go back to being 9 years old and what I was doing in Diablo 2, it was 8-player Bale runs and like getting to learn like what's the best way to like not piss people off and the best way to get loot. Especially with 8 people trying to click, like playing with other people was always the best experience I had. And I'm fine if Diablo tries to instigate that and nurture that in their games. I'm happy if Diablo is a social game. The flip side to that, and very hilariously, a distinctly different thing, is Zhaven made it very clear that Solo Self-Found is coming to Diablo 4, but it's not for Season 11, and also Solo Self-Found in Diablo 4 has to look a lot different than other games. It is an inherently open world game. It's very easy to say like, oh, just do Solo Self-Found like Path of Exile. Path of Exile is not an open world game. You are in a game lobby the entire time. You can go to other people's game lobbies, but you are in a game lobby. In Diablo 4, there's open world. There is couch co-op. There is the raid. There is the Dark Citadel. So they're going to have to find a way to make Solo Self-Found make sense in Diablo 4. And I think really the way that they do that is like you can't trade, you can't group, but you would be in instances with other people. Like you're in instances with other people at the world boss. You're in instances with other people in the Dark Citadel. And basically, as long as you can't trade, it's kind of good enough. Not only that, though, you would have to not benefit from experience bonuses from being in groups. You would have to not get better drops from being in groups. That doesn't change the fact that you could still like get carried technically. So I understand they have a very large lift here. They have a very difficult task to accomplish. But it's very nice to hear that Solo Self-Found is coming in Diablo 4. This is probably the most exciting thing because Solo Self-Found is the only way to allow people who feel like they are disenfranchised due to real money transactions in the game existing, and duping being in the game, and group play being so powerful and trading being so powerful that they can't really compete or feel like they're showing their own expertise in a way that other people can recognize. So for those people, Solo Self-Found will exist. For the people who love the group play and just love to keep doing it, they get to do that as well. And both people get to feel like they are serviced in how they get to experience the game. This is a very silly notion that the developers are just trying to make Diablo 4 into Diablo 3.5. The two big takeaways, the two really good quotes from Zhaven and Colin here, because I felt like they were just such like boss answers. Zhaven says, no, we're not looking to erode anything, right? Everything has to be distinctly Diablo 4 and has to be built with Diablo 4 context in mind. But that being said, he doesn't care where the inspiration or where the idea for something comes from. If it's a previous Diablo game and it's a winning strategy, then yes, they'll use it. If it's from another ARPG, yes, they'll use it. That's clear in the fact that they're adding sanctification, right? Which is just clearly Val orbs from Path of Exile. But I really love this idea that it's like, yes, everything in the game needs to make sense in the game. But if there's great stuff out there and we didn't think of it first, we don't care that it's from something else. If it's good, it's good. It doesn't matter that it's from a previous game. And it doesn't matter if it's from a different game or a different genre or a different concept. And I think that's so powerful to hear them talk very frankly about that. Colin similarly points to toughness. And what they basically realize is that, you know, they try to do their own thing for resistances and armor to start. And then they went, this isn't working. Well, Diablo 2 worked, so we'll just do caps for them. And that's not really working either. You know what? Toughness in Diablo 3 worked. Why would we try to reinvent the wheel again if it did work? And we can instead take this time to go develop more new things that matter. If it turns out that toughness doesn't fit exactly, sure, they'll iterate on it. But it is a thing that does work, and it solved the problem in Diablo 3, and it can solve the problem here. So they don't have to worry about that, and it can instead work on new things. And I think so often what we hear from the community is like, stop just working on stuff and instead make new cool stuff. And that's exactly what this allows them to do. And it's great to hear it in that context so that we can use that to better inform like how we feel about it and what does it mean that we are just lifting this thing. This kind of feeds into the next topic, which is we've been perpetually redoing systems. And how are the players supposed to be excited about that? And when will we nail things down? I don't think that you'll get a super satisfying answer here, but it is an answer that makes sense. It's an answer that I get. And basically what they just have to understand is that, you know, if they're doing this, there kind of always has to be something new too, so that it's not just what this past roadmap was, which was we're redoing hordes, we're redoing bosses, we're redoing Nightmare Dungeons. Now, they did add new stuff onto it, but the context of it, which was just we're redoing them, really soured that experience. What we learned from Zhaven was that their intention is never to allow something to just be old and broken down and become cruft. If something isn't pulling its weight in the game, that thing will receive resources to revitalize it. And if that means that's happening once a season, that's okay. And I agree with that. Maybe it's just a messaging thing, honestly. When we saw like Sins of the Herodrum and it was Nightmare Dungeons are being reworked, that wasn't exciting. Maybe the roadmap could have been made better. But what we got was a new boss, 2 new content types, and a new reason to be doing Nightmare Dungeons that I think vastly improved the experience and added on new stuff. But it got lost in the sauce of, oh, we're just redoing Nightmare Dungeons. And I get where that consternation comes from. So hopefully moving forward, that messaging is also just better. Number 13 kind of speaks to some of these similar concepts, but it's basically, why are seasons being built without a new core mechanic that stays in the game forever? Colin goes on to explain the fact that when something is a seasonal mechanic, it has to be blowing people away. When something is an eternal mechanic, it has to be built with like the totality of all systems in mind and not completely overshadow stuff. Similarly, if every single season, this is more a Zhaven point, but if every single season is adding a brand new power type and a brand new progression system, now every season is dealing with the weight of all of these systems existing, and whatever gets added next would have to up the ante, would have to jump the shark. It would have to blow everything else out of the water for you to continue to get that, oh wow, I just put on this power and now I'm insanely powerful. So clearly that's not good for the health of the game. I think that we generally agree with that. And not only that, people seem to forget, and this is like a major issue, people seem to forget that when this game was coming out, it was like there was a lynch mob basically saying like, hey, you better not just add in new mechanics every season like PoE. We don't just want to play a super bloated game. And the devs were like, you got it, boss. And then like they kind of overcorrected the other way. And then it was like, why are you not adding something every new season? And they're like, but you told us not to. And I think people tend to forget that, but not me. I got it up here like a lockbox. More core things should be added, and that's typically content that should be added. The strong rooms are new content. the change to Bartuk in the Infernal Hordes. I understand it's a rework, but it is new content in the Infernal Hordes. Maybe it's not big enough, but it is a thing, right? So, you know, at least give it like that. But basically where they have the most success is in adding new content, and new progression systems should be a little bit more tame and come in a more natural and organic way. There were a couple questions where like people really didn't like the answers, and I think you just have to read between the lines a little bit here. Question 14 was, people don't know if they should be excited about the expansion. Should they? Zhaven gave an answer that was, we can't talk about the expansion. But what they said was the expansion will be good for the game. Yes. That does answer the question. What it doesn't tell you is like what you should be excited about, but clearly they're not in the PR portion of the cycle yet to be talking about things coming in the expansion, because that's not in the developer's hands. Like they just don't get to talk about that. I know that's not exciting or the most fun answer, but if you read between the lines here, what this tells you is that PR is ramping up to be able to talk about the expansion. That's clearly soon-ish, right? Like the PR press portion of it is clearly soon. And that's something that gets handled there because that all goes into marketing. That's what you need to read between the lines and see. It's kind of a given, but I can understand how if you're watching this interview and you don't think about it in that way, you go like, oh man, just dodging questions. If you're in the know, you get it. That's basically a takeaway here. Question 15 is near and dear to my heart as well. It's whether or not there was a plan to bring the damage numbers down and normalize lower damage numbers, but still being meaningful as opposed to doing trillions and quadrillions of damage. Colin points out that that's not necessarily like a direct plan. They're not like, oh, we need to get damage numbers down. It's more of a secondary plan. There's a lot of power in the game just for power's sake, and it's not meaningful, and it doesn't help you to make informed decisions. It doesn't make you actually make decisions at all. It's just there and it's just strong. So they would like to take out power that's just there for power's sake, and this will, as a secondary effect, bring down damage numbers. That one goes on to point out the fact that things like starting off with extra skill points and paragon points and all the extra attributes from Statues of Lilith were really antithetical to the seasonal nature of the game. A season start's meant to be a fresh start, but everybody was starting like super ahead. And if everybody's starting super ahead, then they're not. Everybody's actually at the same place. So why did they rob us of the ability to be able to progress through and get that power? I tend to agree with this a little bit. The early game where you go like basic, core skill, basic is lame. Like it's just not a particularly fun thing. But that being said, it does give you the catharsis the moment that you automate some of this, where like you generate resource in a better way. So now it's just core skill. We did lose that progression, and gaining it back would help to make the beginning of the game feel more impactful. Topic 16 was about the idea of more Pinnacle encounters and more raids. So basically adding on to the systems that we already have where these things are available. And they pointed out the fact that they were never really expecting to continuously add new raids. The raid was meant to be something that you could go do, and it's something to be like, okay, this season I went and did the raid. I got my cosmetic, I got whatever the thing was. I went and did it. Awesome, cool, I can check that off my list. Similar to Uber Lilith. I went and killed Uber Lilith. I did it on T4 just to prove how big my EPN was. Cool, I can check that off the list. What they would like to do is look to leverage those things more often, be able to reward you during a season, other than just it being a thing over there that you can do if you want to. It's not meant to be infinitely, grinded and, refarmed over and over again, but it's meant to be there as a thing to accomplish. And I think that while it wasn't explicitly said here, they would like to find more things to add to the game that are there for you to accomplish in general. Topic 17 was about how to expand the skill tree. I think this is another read between the lines kind of understanding here. Basically, Colin said, yes, the skill tree is foundational to builds, and right now the ability to create a foundation from your skill tree isn't available, and that there will be major updates to it coming soon, and that's all that they can really say. We knew that the only change that's happened to the skill tree before was in the last expansion. So where I'd expect to see a massive skill tree rework as well as a huge marketing rebrand thing, and something that probably looks really good, in a YouTube clip, is going through the new skill tree. So I imagine this is also in the expansion. That's why we're not really getting better things about this. And I would also assume that we shouldn't expect it in a season. I think that's very clear from this. Raxx asked about basically the Burr rune drop from Diablo 2. The idea that there really aren't mega drops in the game to get us very excited because they have, normalized the grind for mythics, and that there aren't things in the game that are very exciting or not exciting enough. Like, yes, it's very exciting to get like a triple GA on a perfect piece of gear. That doesn't happen enough. And not only that, it's so weirdly diluted that you don't know when it happened, as opposed to dropping a Shaco in Diablo 2. You know when you drop your first Shaco, it's amazing. That little gold text Shaco on the ground, you're like, nice, I just unlocked a new tier here. Colin goes on to ask a question, though, which was that, especially in the idea of like with solo self-found and competition, would you be okay if there were super rare drops in the game and you didn't get one, but somebody else did, effectively meaning that you can't beat them in a competition? Raxx's answer here I do think is important because he highlighted the fact that, one, yes, if you get the super GG drops in a game about getting drops, the ARPG genre itself, you should have a leg up. That's the whole point of the items. I don't think that speaks for everybody. I tend to agree, but I don't think that that speaks for everybody because there is a real ownership over the idea of competition and fairness of competition, which makes total sense. The major issue is that like this really gets into like expectation of ARPGs. And I guess I'm just going to take this as a jumping off point. When we're talking about competition ARPGs, realistically, if there was no RMT, right? So like we're talking about solo self-found here. Competition in ARPGs ends up coming down to commitment and a time to play. So doing the 99 grind in Diablo 2, you will generally expect over a certain number of hours that you'll get a certain amount of minimum investment gear that will allow you to play a build at a certain level. And who gets to level 99 first comes down to commitment. Who is willing to play the most hours in the shortest amount of time, and the people who are willing to help them do that. In solo self-found in Diablo 4, as an example, if you had two equally skilled players, equally reasonable amounts of RNG, and the same amount of hours of time played, they are both equally deserving of being number one. And one of them will be number one when RNG is in their favor. An item drop doesn't change this dynamic. So let's say these two players are racing. This one gets, as Raxx alluded to, the Sword of Truths, the Sword of 1,000 Truths. That person got the RNG outcome. That means that they will win. Number two is still equally viable to be number one, is number two because of RNG, and will always be better than number three. This has to be good and healthy for the game. Because one, it's already true. There's nothing you can do about it. And in non-solo self-found with RMT, one person just gets to buy RNG. They get to do everything faster than you. They don't have to farm. They don't have to deal with grouping. They don't have to deal with boss mats. They don't have to deal with drops. They just get to buy the gear. And if they brick their gear, they get to buy more gear. That person is going to beat you. You can't beat that person if you are equally skilled, equally committed, equal time investment, but this one gets to buy gear. You will not beat them. That's just the truth of it. If it's not equally skilled, then sure, of course, there's going to be a different dynamic. But people attribute this idea of like, well, it's not just the gear, it's not just the skill, it's other things too. Those things all actually just fall into RNG and skill. It's just skill in other, in other arenas. So I like the fact that we are having a conversation of, is it okay for loot to be rare and for that to be really exciting if it means that some people will get things and some people won't? And I do believe that the game for too long has tried to cater to the idea that everybody just deserves to have every single item and to be able to go do everything. And for some reason, we also include doing the highest possible difficulty of a challenge mode content type as doing everything, when in reality, it's if you don't have the ability to invest or you don't want to invest the time and the commitment, you probably shouldn't be able to enjoy the same level of enjoyment as somebody who does. That's just like ARPGs. It's inherent to ARPGs. What it also means, though, is that you can get super lucky as somebody who doesn't have as much time or doesn't want to spend as much time, and you might get the drop, and now you get to enjoy a thing that you didn't deserve, and you get to feel like amazing for that thing. We've lost sight of this concept and the value of it, and a need to, in unhealthy ways, give people access to stuff that they will not even like truly appreciate. And I think that we've kind of lost that a little bit. So it was nice to hear Colin be like, oh, okay, you'd be cool with that? Interesting. This is going to sound elitist. There's no other way for me to talk about it. I think that people who understand the scope and the depth and what can be offered by an ARPG from having experienced ARPGs get why they are fun and why you come back and play them. And it's not you just get every single piece of gear and just go do the thing you've done a million times. It is the journey of doing that and understanding when RNG was on your side and when it wasn't on your side, and finally getting over a bad streak of losses to get a really good thing, or finally hitting that awesome craft, or finally getting that one set piece that you've been looking for that typically you get in like 5 hours, but this time it took 15 hours. But now you get to enjoy that thing, and you've had to come up with all these different ways of expressing your own expertise to overcome the fact that you didn't have it. Those are the fun things about ARPGs. It's not just, it doesn't matter what I've done and I'm killing T4 bosses. Like, there has to be meaning in the game for the game to be fun. Topic 19 was if crafting was ever going to take a bigger role in Diablo 4. I've personally gone on record saying I don't think that crafting exists in Diablo 4. Colin points out that people like crafting, and it's a thing that they want to flesh out to be able to add levers to people to be able to pull on to generate drops, like this idea of, oh, I didn't get the drops here, but I get to go craft here and maybe get a chance at it. And Zhaven pointed out that they are further along in this concept. It was hard to exactly pinpoint what exactly he was talking about, but from what I got from it was that they're actually further along in the idea of adding crafting to the game than just like, oh, just talking about it, because he specifically pointed out that they haven't taken off the table the idea of like blue items and base items being involved in crafting, which means that they must have a pretty solid idea of what crafting will look like. So that's me reading between the lines there. Asked about loot filter, Zhaven said that they're actively working on it. We knew from the previous conversation with Dan Tengway in one of the previous campfire chats that they accepted the fact that loot filters have to exist and they just have to figure it out. Zhaven saying that they're actively working on it means that we haven't lost sight of that. Asked about more stash space, Zhaven said stay tuned. I don't know if there's anything to really like read in between there other than like, I assume the expansion will add stash space. Raxx asked about a new roadmap. Zhaven goes on to say that, you know, rather than having a rigid map, they would like to find better ways of communicating upcoming changes. And the thing that I was reading between the lines there is the idea that like, they want to be more open and they want to give better ideas of like, within this time frame is when we're looking to try to implement something like this. They got burned about the roadmap, right? Because it wasn't exciting enough. So clearly that was a failure. So I see them as wanting to find a different and better way to do it. And they even pointed out that like the roadmap said that the tower and leaderboards were coming next year, which I thought it was going to be with the expansion, to be honest with you, but we're getting it this year. So like even the roadmap, even when it's like failing, but in a good direction, was still failing. So they needed to come up with something better. Raxx asked about adding horizontal progression to the game. More reasons to play the game for longer that aren't necessarily me getting stronger, but me doing more stuff. Colin goes on that the idea that like making alts is very fun and that trying different builds is very fun. This is very horizontal, but they haven't found a great way to be able to support these things. Even with the armory, it's very difficult to say like, oh, go change your build when you would have to like re-add the new points to your Paragon from the last time that you saved. So they basically think that it's not supported enough right now, but they would like to. We got the infamous question, why is Diablo not in Diablo 4? And Zhaven saying he's busy. Probably one of the highlights for the haters. And I get it. It was a ridiculous answer to start off with. But then people just seem to ignore the fact that Zhaven goes on to kind of speak more on this. And it's the idea that clearly this team is looking to focus and tell a story that isn't just and Diablo's back and killing people. I get that some people think that that's kind of antithetical. And, you know, I can be as smarmy as I want. One, Diablo has not been in every Diablo game. Diablo is not in Diablo Immortal. I know that people don't consider that to be a Diablo game, and I will, as many times as I can, go on record in saying, literally do not give them money for that game. Screw them. They lied to us, to our faces, like we're not damn adults that deserve respect. So, like, just hear that, right? It is a good game, though. It's like the best mobile game I've ever played. Okay, sure, that's not a mainline one. I get wanting to see Diablo in a Diablo game. But Zhaven goes on to say that they are very much focusing on the Age of Hatred, the story of Lilith into Mephisto. And it started with Lilith into Mephisto getting a foothold in Sanctuary, into Mephisto realizing himself in the assumed form of Akarat. And I love that they are unapologetically and unafraid to tell more stories in the Diablo universe than just Diablo came back from hell and then we killed him. Clearly Diablo is going to be in the... Clearly we're going to kill Diablo at some point, obviously. But damn, it's really cool to be doing something else. I've already killed Diablo 3 times. How easy it would be for them to just go like, dude, expansion 2, Diablo's back. Sorry, everybody. We already had expansion 1, in line, but you're so right. We're so sorry. Boom, he's here. And clearly they're not doing that. So it must speak to like a conviction of this story that they want to tell. And I appreciate that. Awesome answer. Raxx asked about the cow level. They said, what cow level? Raxx got to say to the Diablo developers, "You're gaslighting me," and Zhaven got to say, "We should probably just move on." Very good bit. And then they asked, "Where's the paladin?" And Colin gave the best answer ever. Colin said, "The Necro's already got a shield. You heard it here first, boys. Me, the ultimate paladin hater, have secretly been playing the pseudo paladin the entire time. The Necro's been our paladin. That's why you didn't get one." Here are some additional insights that weren't really related to a specific question or came up in different questions, but I felt like they were kind of their own thing. One, Colin said that they're adding more torment tiers. There's a lot of implications there. Colin very casually dropped the fact that things like undead, like skeletons, will have a lower awareness than other monsters, so that they're more thematically interesting, where like you'll bust in a door and all the demons will start running at you, but the undead won't see you later. Zhaven let us know that not only like how hard is a monster to kill, but how dangerous they are is going to feed into how much progression they give you in the tower. Colin said that they don't want the game to quickly fast track to something that's just done in a weekend. This was inside of a greater context, but I do like that that is at a forefront concern for them. Zhaven pointed out that while in the PTR you had to do the pit to unlock the tower, as early as Season 11, like when we play Season 11, unlocking the tower can be done from doing the tower itself, so it's not going to be tied specifically to your pit level. I'm also just going to very lightly touch on the fact that the devs did a meme. So Raxx is clearly the blue hoodie guy, so they both wore hoodies. It also just turns out that everybody here wears glasses natively. I don't think that was part of the meme at all. Both Zhaven and Colin wear glasses. This is such a different developer interaction than we had from the first developer campfire, where they had just built the studio and they couldn't quite figure out what to do with Rod Ferguson, and the two Joes were sitting there and we couldn't quite figure out like who was supposed to be explaining what. You know, I think Grinding Gear Games gets a lot of good press for the fact that they're like very human and very approachable, and they're willing to swear, and they talk very honestly. If you walked away from this interview not getting that same vibe, I think you're a hater. I think you're like going out of your way to be upset about it. This is the most human they've been. This is the most approachable they've been. They're in on the joke. They get what the community talks about, and they were just like real. Like at first, Colin, apologized for swearing, not because Colin doesn't love swearing. Colin loves swearing. We call them the spicy chef for a reason. But they were just being conscientious of Raxx's forum and platform here. And Raxx said, "Nah, dog, stay fuck." And then just everybody was just real. Like there was a lightness to this. There was an approachability to it. There was a realness to it that I don't think has been fully missing from previous dev interactions. You know, I think Joe Pipora was just as spicy in his interview the last time that he was here with Adam Jackson as these two were willing to be. This was just good. It was just good and real. Raxx did a great job. There's just like a lot of undue hatred at Raxx because he stopped enjoying the game and then realized that was becoming toxic, and then said, "Okay, I won't just continue to let this toxicity like be here. I will stop engaging with it and I'll take my community away from it." I don't know what else you could want from the guy, but I'm glad to see him back, honestly. Obviously, I have a working relationship with Raxx. Raxx is my friend. I've had a lot of very good and hard and challenging conversations working with him on Max Roll and like how to best serve the community. And he doesn't need me to defend him, right? I don't need to white knight for Raxx. But I think a lot of people maybe forget how much Raxx was championing the needs and the wants of the player base in ways that like few other people were really considering from this game's inception all the way about until like a year and a half into the game existing. And then it turns out it wasn't doing it for him and it wasn't doing it for his community, so we walked away from it. What I was really excited about with this interview is the fact that Raxx seemed excited about it. And I think people aren't necessarily recognizing, they're like, what? You know, I got asked, why wasn't it you? And I appreciate that. I truly do. You know, I think there will be an opportunity in the future. I've been able to interview developers. I got to interview Adam Jackson on the BlizzCon floor. I get a lot of opportunities. But Raxx is kind of the exact person, it represents the exact kind of people I think that the game needs to win back over. You know, people who go like, hey, this game wasn't what I expected and it didn't deliver what I wanted. And they're like, you know what? We really are trying to deliver a game that serves everybody in meaningful ways. And it would be great if the changes that we made could give you an opportunity to come back and love this game that maybe you felt like you weren't allowed to or you didn't get to because it wasn't giving you what you were hoping it would. So Raxx and Raxx's community, not the toxic PoE Andes. And she's like, God, dude, like yes, every, game group is toxic, especially on Reddit. But dude, the PoE psychopaths, not like the good dudes, not the people who actually care about the game, but the people who have made like the game their identity and hating other games their identity, like that crew of people. Yeah, I don't care if the Diablo 4 devs don't win them over, but it's the people who are like, hey, we also love Diablo 4, and then it kind of stopped being what we wanted it to be, and like, that sucks. I do think that this was a prime example of a person with a platform who has those kinds of people, and this interview served to help recontextualize the why of everything and the how of moving forward. So I think the interview was great. I think Raxx did a good job. I think both Colin and Zhaven did an amazing job here. Look at how many topics were talked about. I didn't even read half of what I wrote down here because I didn't want to make this a 1,000-hour-long video. But like, this is good. This is good stuff. This is some of the most like real and honest and good stuff that we've ever gotten. And I learned context. Me, the person who gets to be in the secret meetings and have the, be flown out and shown stuff. I learned context from this. So like, really, I don't know, drink this in. You don't have to, I'm not saying like, oh, and be grateful, but like, at least you try to appreciate it, because this was really good. This was a lot. And hopefully people did appreciate it. Thank you very much for watching this video. I truly, truly hope that it helps. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one.